Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you the tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. I'm going to spend quite a lot of time today talking about air defences, but I'm going to start with talking about the demographic impact on Russia of the war in Ukraine. So it's been, this is according to Chris O. Wiki, it's been starkly revealed by the statistic that in 2022, the war likely caused the death of every second Russian who died between the ages of 20 and 24. People of Baikal reports that, according to Russia's National Statistics Agency, Rosstat, 1.9 million people died in Russia in 2022. Independent sociologists have found that young men had a much higher mortality rate than in 2021. The data in categories older than the 18 to 29 group are not taken into account as they are distorted because of excess mortality caused by COVID-19. People of Baikal comments that the quote share of war deaths in the category of 20 to 24-year-olds is half of all the deaths of young men of this age. That is, every second man of the age who died in Russia last year died in a combat zone. It notes that these figures do not contradict the figures for Russian war dead in Ukraine, which have been collected from open sources, such as relatives. The Russian government keeps its own figures secret. As of the 5th of May, 6,698 young men are confirmed to have died in the war. However, this figure is known to be greatly less than the actual number, as coverage is patchy. Many deaths have not been publicly reported, and the bodies of many of those killed in the war has not been recovered or are still listed as missing in action. This is a really big problem. So loads of people are listed as missing in action so that they don't have to make payouts, so they don't have to admit the war dead statistics, so on and so forth. So any kind of stats that can be gleaned from any official sources are sure to be the most conservative estimates of the war dead. Okay, I just thought that'd be a bit of an icebreaker for you. We're going to talk about the difference between an S-300 and S-400 surface-to-air missile system. Someone asked me about this in a recent thread, especially after I accidentally said S-300 when I meant S-400. And he's like, you meant to say S-400, but actually, what is the difference? So let's have a little look into that. Russia's S-300 provided capable air defense, but the S-400 system is world-class, says this piece from where are we? From the National Interest. Now, you've got to be wary of a lot of stuff written about Russian pieces. And this is going to be the case to a degree with any country, but Russia particularly, they keep their testing very close to their chest. They don't often publish results that might make their weapons look less than perfect. And yeah, the costs and things like that is very much led. It's very much a propaganda exercise. So when you get articles that talk about the S-400, it's often a bit like the Kinzhal missile. It's often, well, this is what the Russians have said, and if we believe what they say, then it's amazing. The reality is often not quite at the level of the propaganda, as you can imagine. So anyway, this article will be broadly based on what is being claimed of the S-400. Anyway, what does it say? While the capabilities of the S-400 may appear to be a significant leap, they got there through the slow evolution of the earlier S-300 missiles. In other words, the S-400 many might claim it's this big new surface-to-air missile system that's so much better than the S-300, but actually it really isn't. It's just an incremental step on from the S-300, and actually you need to look at the missiles being used as much as anything. So the S-400 is one of the most controversial missiles in the world. Currently, the United States has imposed economic sanctions on countries simply for buying the system. It says the advances in missile and radar technology, are what makes this particularly Impressive. The new radars used in the S-400 make it likely very capable versus almost all air targets. Another key aspect of the S-400 is the ability to use 4 different types of missiles with different weights and capabilities, allowing the system by itself to form a large portion of a layered air defense. This makes the S-400 a more flexible system. It can utilize missiles employed by earlier S-300 variants. The new missiles for the S-400 predictably extend the range even further, out to 240 kilometers versus aerial targets. An incremental upgrade from the S-300 PMU-1, which could go out to 150 kilometers, and the S-300 PMU-2, which could go to about 200 kilometers. Newer missiles like the 40N6 can even boost the range out to 400 kilometers for the S-400. What does this mean about the S-400? At its heart, it's still a relatively road mobile system designed for air defense forces. While it represents a significant capability leap, especially compared to fielding first generation S-300 PT and PS systems, and is significantly more flexible than earlier variants of the S-300, the evolution of the S-300 into a more flexible, capable system was already going with the various sub-variants of the S-300 PMU. In other words, translated, the S-300, the older variants were much less capable than the S-400, but when you look at the newer variants of the S-300 used with decent missiles on the S-300, then actually the difference between the S-300 and the S-400 is less significant. So while the capability of the S-400 may appear to be a significant leap, they got there through the slow evolution of earlier S-300 missiles. Many of the advanced features, such as the ballistic missile interception, interchangeable modular missiles, and multi-channel engagement, have been present in the system for a long time. And the S-400 just builds upon the existing strengths of the S-300 to make it an even more deadly threat. Now, that's quite a positive argument article on the S-400. So this is a piece in Sandbox entitled "The S-400 Myth: Why Russia's Air Defense Prowess is Exaggerated." Now, this isn't just an anti-S-400 piece. This is like the S-400 is good, but here's where we need to be a little bit careful. And it's actually, a pretty substantial piece. Okay, let's dip into it. Russia's S-400 Triumph, often referred to as the SA-21 Growler within NATO circles, is widely touted as one of, if not the most capable air defense systems in the world. With the ability to leverage a variety of missiles to engage different air threats, an engagement range of nearly 250 miles, and widely praised counter-stealth capabilities, the S-400 has gained a reputation as one of the few systems capable of countering America's air dominance approach to warfare. But it goes on to say, first, the system is not nearly as capable as it is often perceived to be. Second, it is nonetheless among the most capable air defense systems in use today. The emphasis on hypersonics value as a means of overcoming these systems suggests that subsonic and even supersonic missiles can't. But intercepting any missile is a very difficult proposition that no air defense system in the world can manage with 100% efficacy on a consistent basis. This is why having all of these different systems, say around Kiev, where you might have Patriots, and then you might have NASAMS and Iris-T, and then lower value ones like Gepard, and so on and so forth, and the old Kratal and Hawk, you start piecing all these bits together, and you're going to have a much greater chance of taking things down that come your way. And it's sort of an integrated system is going to be useful. Okay, the primary differences between the older S-300 system and the more modern S-400 came in the form of an updated and refined radar systems, improved software, and the incorporation of new missile types to offer flexibility in target intercepts and increased range. Another very important aspect of the S-400 system is the electronic warfare countermeasures, including rapid frequency hopping to limit the effectiveness of radar jamming and agile beam steering for improved target acquisition and tracking. So then it goes on to talk an awful lot about the radar and what would happen if you put it against, say, an F-35. This detection range is a basis for many S-400 counter-stealth claims, but it fails to acknowledge the difference between detecting a stealth fighter and targeting one. So it says, yep, it's pretty good at detecting, but actually targeting makes it is a kind of different matter. And lots of detail in there. But based on assessments, the S-400 can target aircraft like the F-35. So it's looking at, say, one of the best US fighter aircraft and saying, right, what if you put these two against each other, who would come out on top? So it can uh, based on assessments, the S-400 can target aircraft like the F-35, but likely not until the jet flies within 20 miles of the system. As a result, in a one-on-one fight between America's F-35A and Russia's S-300, the stealth fighter would almost certainly take home the win in a future conflict, thanks to the forthcoming adoption of weapons like the Northrop Grumman's Advanced Anti-Radiation Guided Missile Extended Range, so the ARRGMER. So you fire an anti-radiation missile like that from a much greater distance, then you can be targeted. Yeah, it might be able to detect you, but it can't set a target on you until you get close enough, but by which time you've shot off your missiles and blown up the S-400. So then it goes into talk a lot about that. The fictional engagement doesn't reflect the reality of large-scale combat between the US and Russia, however, as the S-400 is most effective when leveraged as part of a broader integrated air defense system, IADS. This is what it's talking about with the new IADS system that is being given to Ukraine, which connects all the NATO pieces of kit together in one integrated system, and that is incredibly useful for the Ukrainians. That I don't think the Russians have. They don't seem to have as integrated a system as potentially the Ukrainians will end up having. It would be more difficult to engage these systems with F-35s when they are networked with airborne warning and control system aircraft, AWACS, to provide increased detection rates beyond the horizon, alongside a network of other air defense systems working in tandem. The question is, well, do Russia really have that? The next subtitle is the easy way to defeat Russia's S-400: a whole bunch of cruise missiles. Right. This is how this connects to the Patriot missile event, where Kiev was attacked by six Kinzhal, three S-400 missiles possibly, and a whole bunch of was it 8 or 9 cruise missiles, trying to overwhelm the system. Uh, what would have been great is for the Russians is you overwhelm that system, and then you send a bunch of cruise missiles, and you have like a second wave. You exhaust all the interception missiles, and then hit them again. The fact that Russia didn't do that, I think, just speaks to their capacity. They're just running low on these stockpiles. They don't have the ability to send out waves and waves of these. Anyway, so it goes on to talk in detail about how you take out these pieces of kit. It goes on to say here, without over the horizon sensors, the S-400 and other powerful HIMARS systems are vulnerable to low altitude attack by cruise missiles, which in large numbers can overwhelm an air defense system. Geographical factors weigh heavily on a system's usefulness, with mountainous features able to block the system's sensors. A low-flying target can take advantage of geographical features and the curvature of the Earth to avoid an S-400 interception for far longer than a high-flying target. Right, this is where, if you want to win an argument against a flat earther, tell them to go and do some work in air defense systems, which require the curvature of the Earth. Like the curvature of the Earth, if you think about a ball, a sphere, you put something on top of it. When you send something out in a straight line, that goes out there. You can send something just very low to the Earth, and it can't detect it until the Earth curves enough, and you're on the same kind of horizon line, or whatever you want to call it, as the radar that's being sent out. So you can use the curvature of the Earth. Flat earthers, you don't know what you're talking about. Jog on. These limitations, while not unique to the S-400 or to Russia, become pressing vulnerabilities when the opposition has greater control over the surrounding airspace. So this is super important, and it's why you do suppression of any enemy air defense, destruction of enemy air defense activities for a month before you invade somewhere, because you need to use, in order to have a really good defense, your offense needs to be active as well, and you need to have taken out their defense type of thing. So it's all about air superiority, and when that's all contested, then these things become less effective. Despite its stated shortcomings, the S-400 system is indeed highly capable and is often characterized as more effective than America's dated but frequently updated Patriot missile systems. However, like many legacy warfare technologies, low-cost missile and drone technologies may prove too much for the S-400 to withstand. So an S-400 battalion usually consists of 8 missile launch platforms, each armed with 4 missiles, regardless of missile types. That means that the battalion can intercept a maximum of 32 targets before running out of interceptors to fire. and that's all the pieces of kit there. And they have multiple launchers, but otherwise each of those, there's one of each of these. Yeah, eight, but up to 12 launchers. And yeah, so a range of 400 kilometers, 250 miles. What you can do is send off loads of missiles from bigger airplanes like the JASSMER cruise missiles, whack a bunch of those down and overwhelm them. To effectively overwhelm an entire S-400 battalion, oppositional forces need only to fire more missiles and can feasibly be intercepted. And again, let's rewind to the Patriot missile events of the other night. What was it, 18 missiles and then some drones and whatnot, or was that in total? I can't remember. Either way, you are not going to be overwhelming the entire Kyiv air defense systems, right? So interesting. Against a low-flying cruise missile, an S-400 will more likely find success at a distance of tens of kilometers rather than in the hundreds. Ultimately, an isolated S-400 battery or even battalion will, therefore, be vulnerable to a saturation standoff attack and may even be destroyed without destroying a single enemy aircraft. So, these things are susceptible to that kind of saturation attack. When it comes to like the real world failures of the Russia's S-400s and related systems, it's difficult to get a handle on what the shortcomings are because Russia don't publish them. Um, According to Russia, the S-400 system has been tested a total of 32 times across 6 combat exercises with no failures, and that's almost certainly misleading. As researchers Shay Cotton and Jeffrey Lewis pointed out in their analysis for the Nuclear Threat Initiative, it's much more likely that Russia simply doesn't disclose testing failures, which, when juxtaposed against America's testing transparency, creates a heightened perception of Russia's prowess. So everyone thinks that Russia's better because it's selection bias, it's a publication bias actually, or the file drawer effect, which is where you don't produce null results or negative results, you only produce a positive result. So you skew how effective you think things are. During these tests, Russian forces fired an unknown number of interceptors, intercepting an unknown number of targets of unknown capability. Furthermore, Russia reported to state media that 100% of the attempted S-400 intercepts were successful. To date, we have not been able to identify any reports of failed intercept tests involving the S-400. Like our hypothesis involving India, this suggests Russia is concealing most of its developmental tests or other failed intercepts. And despite Russia's claimed successes in testing, there have been a number of high-profile failures of the S-400 and associated systems in recent years. So where they have been used around the world by different nations, they are not, and in different places, Syria and so on and so forth, they haven't been as perfect as the testing should indicate or has indicated. So as it continues here, or drawing on another paper, to destroy the air defense systems. This is when it's the S-300's been used in with Azerbaijan here. So to destroy the air defense systems, Azerbaijan used decoy aircraft in Armenian territory. So the Azerbaijanis were trying to take out S-300s in Armenian territory, which was shot at by deployed air defense systems. The action exposed the locations of those air defense systems, which were then neutralized by drones. And this is the importance of using a whole variety of stuff. So you send out a load of missiles, they get intercepted, and you're like, now we know where everything is. Now send in the drones. Russian air defense systems, such as the Tu-12 Kub, 9K-35 Strela 10, and the 9K-35 Osa, and the 2K-11 Krug, could not intercept a number of drones, which either reached their intended targets or destroyed the air defense system itself. Azerbaijan has also claimed that it destroyed several batteries of the S-300 air defense systems and circulated footage in this regard. This is highly concerning, as it suggests that the S-400, which is the successor of the S-300, would have similar vulnerabilities. In other words, if you want to overcome the S-400, it's not that difficult. You just need to saturate with a bunch of different missiles, different types, and arguably to then send in a load of drones and all other missiles as well. The fact of the matter is the S-400 and its recently deployed successor, the S-500, are indeed very capable air defense systems, but they remain limited by the physical, financial, and geographical constraints on their operational environments and the defense capabilities of the countries that use them. Like all weapon systems, their real value can only be found when properly integrated into a larger defensive apparatus based on a functional and effective combat doctrine. The S-400 is almost certainly not the stealth defeating air defense force field it's often claimed to be, but it is a highly effective system with scalable capabilities through network support. So these things basically are as good as their networks, and for them to be effective, properly effective, then they would need to be networked together effectively. Right. Moving on from that to the Kinzhal, I just want to. So I'm going to deal with pro-Russian voice on my thread, but not really to just go, you're wrong, although that might be part of it. But it's actually say, well, actually, this is relevant to kind of what we're talking about, and that brings us on to connected information to do with air defense and to do with missiles, in this case, the Kinzhal, the Dagger missiles. So he said, Jonathan engages in baseless speculation. So I was talking about how the cost of the saturation missile attack on the Patriot battery the other night cost a huge amount of money, easily upwards of 120 million. And I said, well, you got $60 million worth of Kinzhal missiles at 10 million a pop. And he's like, Jonathan engages in baseless speculation. It's impossible to know with any degree of certainty the cost of production of Russian missiles. They are expensive for sure, but how much? That's impossible to determine. Actually, it's not. I can tell you it doesn't cost 10 quid. Right. So it's not impossible to determine. We know it costs more than 10 quid. Okay. So what's reasonable out that? We have a range. When we don't know, we postulate we posit a range based on what we do know. Right. So actually, that's just nonsense. So let's make an educated guess then. There's not just baseless speculation. This is what annoys me. Words matter. It's as if I've gone, they cost $10 million because I've plucked that out of my posterior. That would be a baseless speculation, right? But actually, I based it on an article and a bunch of other stuff that the article was which is the one I referenced, said it cost at least $10 million a pop, right? So he would then need to say that's a baseless speculation, but he doesn't know that. He doesn't know where they've got their information from. He doesn't know where I've got my information from. So that accusation of baseless speculation is a baseless accusation. So jog on. Anyway, let's have a look at that. But here's an interesting question anyway. So what is a Kinzhal, the dagger? So the dagger, or the Killjoy as NATO call it, is basically based on the Iskander, right? It's an upgraded missile. It's hypersonic and it apparently goes at Mach 10, although lots of people deny that actually that's a reality. Again, we get back to what the Russians claim and what the reality is. So the claim is it goes at Mach 10, so 10 times the speed of sound, and it's hypersonic. Because anything above Mach 5 is hypersonic. But it's basically an Iskander missile that can just go a bit faster. It's still a ballistic missile. Now, we know that costs $3 million. So, okay, so we've got something that has been designed on the back of the Iskander, based on the Iskander, and that costs $3 million. So this thing that goes even faster and is even more technology, even better, is going to cost at least $3 million. There you go. It's not baseless speculation. We're now moving up from 10 quid to $3 million. Okay, $3 million. But what you've got to understand is that costs start going up exponentially the faster you go. So speed becomes a cost. If you correlate cost with speed, then you understand that creating a hypersonic missile becomes a super expensive thing to do. Which is why most other countries have actually given up. The reason why Russia are hey, check us out, we've got hypersonic missiles, and you guys don't, is because everyone gave up making them, because actually the cost of making them is not worth what they can give you. So it turns out that if you want to achieve the aim of that hypersonic missile, which is to get through and blow this thing up, the faster you go, the smaller your warhead, that kind of thing, you can achieve that outcome much more cheaply. So Americans and other countries have gone, yeah, we could have this arms race with you about hypersonic missiles, but it'll cost us crazy amounts of money. So then let's look at these crazy amounts of money. Well, CBO estimates that a hypersonic missile for the cost for the ARRW hypersonic missile would be $15 to $18 million each. That's for the Americans. And that's when they're making them at scale, large production run, but a comparable army ground launch system would cost 3 times more. So when he's saying, "Oh, $10 million, you pluck that out, it's baseless speculation," it's like, well, the American version would cost like nuts money. In fact, Bloomberg states that hypersonic sticker shock US weapons may run to $106 million each. So that's something. And the article that I talked about it being $10 million and above, I mean, they're benchmarking it at 10 million, but it could be well more than that, is there. So it's a CNBC article from a few years back, before the war, talking about Putin's missile, because he was like bigging up this missile, this Kinzhal. Vladimir Putin's so-called missile with unlimited range is too expensive for the Kremlin and has yet to fly further than 22 miles. And this is when they was going through loads of problems with trying to get this thing up and running because of its cost, right? And then because of issues with testing and so on and so forth, which is why they don't have many of them. But also, you've got to understand at this early stage, when they've only produced a few of them, then the R&D costs are going to be spread amongst fewer missiles. So the actual cost of these things is far, far higher than you might think. It's not about the unit cost of like, now we're going to make them. It's like technically, well, it depends how you cut these things up. But if you're talking about the cost of these missiles needing to, you're going to have the kind of the manufacturing cost, but are you going to include the R&D costs for all the years before and the huge amounts of money that would have cost the Russians to do? Anyway, it talks about these being just prohibitively expensive. At this point, the Kremlin will only produce a few of these because the weapon has yet to complete a successful test and is too expensive to develop, according to sources with direct knowledge of a US intelligence report on the weapons program. So the US intelligence at the time, this is, as I say, back in 2019, were like, yeah, too expensive. And it turns out that they are too expensive, I would guess, considering the limited gains they actually get you. Now, I'm going to refer you to the brilliant Perun video came out a couple of weeks ago on hypersonic missiles. I'm going to dip into several points of this, and I hope that's okay with you.
The reality, however, is that there's a lot of technical costs and considerations that stand in the way of hypersonics becoming dominant, and they have a way of adding zeros to the resulting price tag. Perhaps the easiest way to conceptualize this is just imagine speed as having a cost. Now, different aircraft are obviously designed to operate ideally and efficiently at different speeds, but all else being equal, flying fast, that is, going supersonic, does bring on costs. Because flying faster is going to generate more air resistance, you're going to expend more energy doing it, and you're going to need to reinforce your airframe and redesign it to survive the stresses of flying at higher speeds. That's going to drive up cost and limit things like payload. It's one of the reasons conventional commercial air travel is subsonic, not supersonic. If you want to go really quickly through atmosphere, the physics gods demand attacks. A great historical example here is to compare the American F-8 and A-7. The Vought F-8 Crusader was an American supersonic carrier-based fighter, and a pretty damn good one at that. It would later serve as the basis for a distinct but very closely related aircraft, the A-7 Corsair II. This wasn't a supersonic fighter, it was a ground attack aircraft, and in redesigning it, the designers managed to find a way to increase its range, reduce its takeoff weight, and multiply its ability to carry ordnance several times over. And one of the main ways they did that was simply by making the aircraft subsonic. By simply removing all of the concessions that existed to allow this thing to fly at supersonic speeds, you were able to get a cheaper airframe that was capable of doing far more heavy lifting. We already know that this holds true for missile design as well. Generally speaking, the Russians build pretty good missiles and rockets. The Onyx anti-ship missile, which you can see there on the bottom, is a pretty impressive piece of kit. But compared to the Tomahawk, very roughly, it's got a smaller warhead, weighs about twice as much, and has perhaps half the range. And depending on how you measure it, it may also be significantly more costly. The primary driver here isn't that the Russian designers are incompetent or that Tomahawk is a particularly modern cruise missile. They're not, and it's not. The problem is that Onyx is a ramjet-powered design that has to travel at more than twice the speed of sound. You can probably see where this is going as we try and ramp the Mach numbers up above 5.
And then he goes into a lot of detail to basically say that once you start getting up above Mach 5, it just becomes ridiculously expensive because you have to basically overcome physics with money. Uh, to cut a long story short, and this really, I mean, as he said, it takes down the size of the warhead because you need a lighter, arguably smaller missile. And then it becomes a less effective missile. Ideally, you want a really big payload to go really far, long distances at crazy speed, so it can't be detected or shot down. Okay, well, if you go to the crazy distance, crazy speed, so it can't get detected and shot down, then unfortunately, you're going to have to lose some of that payload, and you're going to have to lose some of that range. So that's a situation. So just skipping forward to a little bit, past all the justification of why this will cost a lot of money and all the physics involved in designing these things, we'll just go to the end of this section.
Yeah. Now, none of these costs are impossible to compensate for. You can make a vehicle with enough energy to go really, really quickly, made of the right materials to endure really, really high temperatures, manufactured to incredibly high tolerances so it's reliable despite its incredibly high performance, and then make it big enough to carry a reasonable warhead to have a large effect on target despite all the other concessions that have been made. And at the end of the day, the cost of all those costs being compensated for is just cost. It's just cold hard cash. And so you start talking about HGV systems that cost tens of millions of dollars per shot. You may end up with a weapon system that is very capable and which can engage a wide range of targets on a very short time frame. But with all the economic efficiency of rigging an F-16 for unmanned flight and then smashing those into your chosen target, a hypersonic may be a potential answer to a given military problem. But because of their cost and complexity, they may not always be the right weapon for the job. Which is why I want to look at the missions that hypersonic weapons are hypothetically meant to fill.
And he goes into loads more detail looking at the cost and actually what do you want, what's the outcome you want here, and is this the best thing to use for that? And basically it's not. It's essentially saying that these are too expensive to make and you're better off using other things to do that job. There you go. And then lots of other stuff and talking about more detail about the Kinzhal itself, in terms of, can it do what they claim it can do? Is it overhyped, etc., etc. But the idea is that these things are going to cost a lot of money. So when you're talking about $10 million a pop, I think that's really reasonable, and I would argue that they probably cost more than that. And you could even say if this is where Russians get into a bit of trouble, because if it can go Mach 10, it's going to cost a load of money. So what one do you want to give up here, Russia? Do you want to give up that it doesn't cost crazy money, or do you want to give up that it actually goes Mach 10? Because you can't have something that goes Mach 10 that's going to cost you $3 million a pop. It ain't going to happen. So to go back to what this guy said, I just massively dismiss what this guy says as just being just a load of nonsense. It's not a baseless speculation. It is a speculation, but it's I think a justifiable speculation based on all the stuff that I've read and listened to over the last year about on this particular subject. And I think, yeah, $10 million a pop that someone else has speculated, I think is a reasonable speculation. And until we could go on something called phenomenal conservatism here in philosophy. Phenomenal conservatism is, absent of a defeater, I think I'm justified in believing my intuitions, and my intuitions here are themselves actually not just intuitions; they're based on like rational justifications and rationale, right? So, absent of a defeater, and it's not a defeater just say, you know what you're talking about, so la la la, and stick your fingers in your ears. That's not a defeater. So until you come back with why my speculation or why my reasoning here is incorrect, I'm justified in believing my reasoning. So it is not good enough to come to me with a defeater that amounts to nothing more than you're wrong. It's just rubbish. Okay. Now, talking about the Kinzhal hitting, member of the channel analytics group who often does some analysis of different claims that are made. Really, really great stuff. Thank you. Says here, it's fascinating to learn about the speed and capabilities of the Kinzhal missile. However, in missile defense, speed isn't the only important factor. A lighter, more maneuverable missile like the Patriot could potentially intercept a faster one like the Kinzhal using a head-on interception strategy. So yes, this hypersonic missile might be going super fast. The idea is, as it's going super fast, do you shoot it up from below and come up at it like that? But then you kind of have to go the speed of the speed that the missile is going, or you're going to have to get it exact. The timing has to be perfect, because as the thing goes across, you have to shoot up. I'm being really simplistic here. The hypersonic missile shooting across there. Now, if you're too early, you're going to miss it. You're too late, you're going to miss it. And this is only like the length of a missile, right? So it's got to be head on. It's got to be perfect. That timing has to be perfect. Whereas if you're shooting at the missile head on and you know its trajectory, you know its path, its route, then actually at any point along that, you can just have your missile sitting there, or in fact you could just have something that doesn't even move, that's just in the way of that missile, and it's going to hit it, right? So if you can calculate its route really accurately, then the timing isn't important, because you just have to send the other missile on that route just from the other direction, and it doesn't need to be faster than this. As I said, it could be stationary. And this is what Analytics Group kind of points out here. A lighter, more maneuverable missile like the Patriot could potentially intercept a faster one like the Kinzhal using a head-on interception strategy. Thanks to the Patriot's lighter weight and superior maneuverability, it has a distinct advantage in the head-on scenario, being able to make the necessary course adjustments more easily than the faster, heavier Kinzhal. With early warning from systems like AWACS, a Patriot missile could be launched into the opposite direction of the Kinzhal's projected flight path. Once on this path, the Patriot adjusts its course for a head-on collision with the Kinzhal. An interesting part of the strategy is that head-on interception timing becomes less critical. As long as the Patriot is positioned in the Kinzhal's flight path, the exact moment of interception is less important, as the two missiles will inevitably collide if both continue on their courses. This is a stark contrast to a bottom-up interception where timing is essential. This suggests that the Kinzhal might not be the best choice for attacking air defense systems like the Patriot itself. The attack path of the Kinzhal would typically be head-on relative to the defensive systems, which nullifies its speed advantage and allows a well-positioned Patriot missile to intercept it. While it's a complex problem, the strategy shows that there's more to missile defense than just speed. Now, I don't know if that's really what goes on, and et cetera, and how defensible that is, but it seems eminently good reasoning there. And I really appreciate that. If anyone else has expertise on this subject, please let us know. And I guess the last thing I'm going to say connected to this is going to be another, or is not actually connected to this, but I was just looking as I was reacting to this comment. He did another comment here, which I just want to. It's a good time to show how people can think badly, right? Irrationally. Here's a great example. So you'll get this a lot. The Russian voices have to sell any Ukrainian successes as not successful, as way less than they are, because otherwise they have to admit that Ukraine are doing well, and they can't do that. So when the Ukrainians take 20 square kilometers on the flanks of Bakhmut, they have to say, right, okay, what's the problem for us? I'm Russian, and my boss is telling me I've got to sell, and the bot factory is telling me I've got to sell the Ukrainian success as complete failure. So they've made 20 square kilometers. I can't deny that. All the sources are saying that. So I have to say, what do I have to say? I have to say that 20 square kilometers is puny. It's just not good enough. Okay, it's my only option. That's what I'm going to go for. And so here we have it. In short, after gaining a pitiful 20 square kilometers in 10 days, Ukrainian offensives around Bakhmut is stalled, and encirclement of Russian troops in the city is years away. Right. So this is really interesting because it's utterly wrong on everything it claims. Pitiful 20 square kilometers. A, is not pitiful. That's actually pretty impressive. B, is less than 10 days. C, it hasn't stalled. There's no evidence to suggest it's stalled. And D, the encirclement of Russian troops in the city is years away. Okay, so this is just all of those 4 points are wrong. So if 20 kilometers in less than 10 days is what the Ukrainians have taken, then we can extrapolate that to see how long would it take to encircle Bakhmut, not years. But the important point here is, as I said to him is, hang the hell on. This is complete and utter double standards. During the advances of the Russians in and around Bakhmut over the last 9 months, did you ever call them pitiful gains? Given that Ukrainians have advanced more in a couple of days than the Russians had in a couple of months. I mean, I screwed all this up. I do speech to text, and sometimes it goes completely wrong. More than the Russians have in a couple of months, I presume you'll be happy to admit that the Russians made even worse than pitiful gains previously. This is absolutely terrible double standards, right? If these are okay, I accept these are pitiful gains. 20 kilometers in a few days is pitiful gains. What have the Russians done in 9 months around Bakhmut? Only because I'm fairly sure it's not that rate of gain. In which case, if that is pitiful gains, were you shouting from the rafters about how worse than pitiful, terribly pitiful the Russian gains were? If you weren't, jog on, right? That's double standards. You're not worthy of my time. I've given you my time, but just to show you how Russian voices often think, which is they don't think. This is very poor, and I'm going to announce it. Chana Moshe is a very bad thinker and should be dismissed from my threads. That, as in, I'm dismissing that. I'm not banning him, but I'm dismissing that. He's not worthy anymore. So toodle pips to him. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope this gave a bit of meat on the bones for how we understand, for example, the S-400 system a little bit, but also Kinzhal missiles and the costs involved, so on and so forth. Thank you so much. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.